Welcome to the Modern Farming Podcast, where we bring you insights directly from the field about agriculture, food, and the amazing environment we live in. Hey, thanks for being with us here as we launch our series on Dirt to Dinner. So, for the next 3 episodes, we will discuss the science of soil and nutrition. And we we have two world-class guests that if you're interested in soil health, food health, regenerative agriculture, or maybe you're just curious about ranching and what beef production is all about, uh, you, or should I say, Brad, maybe the right way to do it, then stay with us here. The next 3 episodes, because we have stacked the deck thanks to the amazing relationships that Brad has forged over the years. We've invited these two superstars that ultimately make us look great. And we can always use a little bit of that, right? So I think there's a whole lot of conversation, and we'll talk about it here today in agriculture right now about food and nutrition, soil health, regenerative health, and what do all these things mean? And I, you know, I think Brad, I want to dig in here first and just talk about that. There's just seems to be a lot of noise about regenerative farming, at least in some circles. In our circles, there seems to be
Yeah.
a lot of noise, and some will say that the word regenerative is like the new organic farming term. Have you heard this?
Yeah, no, it is, and it's a completely different model actually. But one thing I wanted to say as we talk about this Dirt to Dinner series is the science of soil and nutrition. If you look up the definition of science in the dictionary, you'll see several definitions, but most of them will pertain to nature. One of them will
Mm.
say the study of the natural world through observation and experimentation, and one will talk about adhering to natural principles. So science has kind of gotten skewed over the years, and that's a lot of what I did. I took that to heart, as I'll talk about later in my research, where I just observed and adhered to natural principles, and cool things can happen.
Yeah, and I think that this is, I don't know. Some days I think it's blown out of proportion. Like, hey, why do we need to name it anything? Let's just
Right,
let's just do let's just do what's right. And
right.
I get that's sort of ambiguous, but there's no doubt a lot of noise, good or bad, surrounding the newest wave of production. And I
Yeah,
think we're on the same page here when I say, I don't really give a crap how you do it as long as you're doing it right.
yeah,
And that is really ambiguous, but because what is right for one grower is not right for everyone.
right.
So so
Many different situations, and it's not about you can't do this. Growers sometimes have to do bad things, and I
mm,
sometimes give them what I call a carbon penalty. Okay, if we have to make this cultivation pass, we have to use this herbicide, we're going to do some bad things, we need to try to offset that. And so it's not, there's no set rules. You and I know there's some things coming in testing that I think will probably set some standards, that if you can grow a soil so much in a certain year, whether it's life or carbon, then you're considered a good, not a good grower, but a regenerative type of grower. And I think that's
yeah.
where this is going.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Offsets and things. We should probably eventually do an episode on carbon and carbon offsets and things like that, because I think, gosh, even for me, that is a excuse me, that is a whole world that is unknown, really. It's really hard to understand the whole carbon credits, how people are trading carbon. But to your point, um, how we have to do some things on the farm today. And I don't think the average consumer fully understands that. I don't know if the average environmentalist or tree hugger, quote unquote, understands that there are just some things that we have to do,
Yeah.
that I think we even do in our daily lives, right?
Yeah.
There are times where we use cleaners in my house that we don't normally use, but every now and again,
Yeah.
you got to get a little mildew or something off the shower. You got to go get the, the high powered CLR from Home
Yeah.
Depot or Lowe's, and almost wear a gas mask when you spray it, but you got to do it. And I think
Yeah.
uh, for our growers, you and I both know for sure that I don't know if pesticides are ever going to go away. I don't know if herbicides are ever going to go away.
Yeah.
Um, like you say, things like tillage. If you look at the Midwest, there's a whole group of guys doing no-till, and that's really helping conserve some moisture. But there are times, I remember, I forget what year it was, maybe um, 2015 or 16 in the Midwest, the upper Midwest, the northern plains. We had so much water. We had so much rain. We had a ton of snow, and then we had a really wet spring. There was guys tilling from April to almost June just to dry out their fields.
Right.
And so yeah, did that release a lot of carbon? Did we,
Yeah.
kill billions of microbes? Yeah. But they had to do that to move
Right.
water. Otherwise, they were out
Yeah,
of
they were
business.
already in that model, and that's really the only option. And tilling wet soil is not a good thing. It's much better to till it dry, but they do what they have to do. It takes years to build healthy soil and to build that water infiltration and the gas exchange. Every farmer wants healthy soil. You won't talk to one that says, "Oh, that's hogwash." They believe in it, but it doesn't happen overnight, and and it can be costly. And
I think that's the biggest challenge is the cost, right? So what I wanted to first do is, really maybe help the listener. And I know we have all groups here following us and listening to us, and thank you for following us on YouTube and Facebook. We get a report from a team, and it's really weird for Brad and I to say we have a team because we're a really small organization. We're a nonprofit, but we really do have some incredible people. Rachel being one of them, and she always gives us this data on how our numbers are. We're growing. So thank you to all the listeners. Please help us continue to grow. Share this with your friends, your family, especially the next 3 episodes here. We're going to blow your mind. I was super excited yesterday when I sent Brad and the team a text saying that somebody had responded to me. Well, of course, Brad already knows him, and Brad's good friends with him. So when I text Brad that, he called me from the road, and then he immediately called his friend and said, "Hey, I heard you talk to Nick." So we are extremely excited, and there's going to be a ton to learn here over the next 3 weeks, and you will be blown away by what these 2 individuals have already done and what they're continuing doing, and just their story, how incredible just individuals they are, and they come from all over the country, right? So please stay with it. But I think as we move forward in this series, dirt to dinner. I always remember my soils professor telling me, dirt is what's under your fingernails. Soil is what we grow in. And but hey, anyways, it makes for good advertising. Dirt to dinner, and I think really what's really important, what I thought about as we developed this series was maybe we should give everybody kind of an insight to how did we get here? If you look at agriculture in the U.S. or around the world, there has been these moments, these tipping points, if you will, where we adopted a system that did a lot of really great things. I think you've heard me talk before about just production in the world of um, all crops, right? Rice, corn, wheat, soybeans. Production has gone almost vertical from the 70s until now, and that was largely due to inputs. And I think what most people don't understand, and I didn't either until I really dug into, why did we get here? Because if you look at the first settlers or the first farmers in the world or ever, they didn't have your local agronomist, right? They didn't have a Brad and Nick floating around. They didn't have YouTube to understand uh, composting and tillage and things like that. So how did they do it? Well, they used what they had, and that was the soil. And the soil was really at the very beginning the focus. There was a point, a tipping point where soil became secondary, soil became sort of a media. And I think it's worth talking about how we got here and to this point and why we're so concerned with soil and soil health to promote food production and nutrient value in our food. So I think it's worth looking way back to our forefathers of soil health, guys like Dukachev, Thayer, Frank, and these guys were all talking about everything Brad and I talk about long before even the microscope was invented. So when we say regenerative is a new way of farming, it's really not. You know, the word humus was used by um, a soil scientist, John Walrus, in 1753. 1753, this guy kind of identified this thing called humus, and he was really referring to the organic surface, that horizon relative to decomposing organic matter. And we hear humus all the time now. Like it's and for the last 2 decades, it's been a thing. Like where is that humus layer? How do we get more of that into our soil? How do we get more organic matter to decompose to make this humus? You'll see a lot of your soil bags at Lowe's, Home Depot, Walmart, wherever you buy 'em, they'll probably say humus in there somewhere, right? But the
Yeah, that
father
irks
of
me a little bit.
I'm sorry?
I say that irks me when I see that a little bit because you and I study what humus actually is, and it's its own compound. I mean, it's its own entity almost. But yeah,
Right.
100 years ago, I was reading in citrus books, and they would talk about humus,
Yeah.
and they were just relating it. It was another word for organic matter, which we know that's different now. But yeah, that word gets greenwashed and thrown around a lot.
I know, and in those bags, look, again, do what's right, right? Do the best you can. When I have people call me and ask me, how do I do my garden this year, or what should I do this year? And I always tell them the same thing: buy the best inputs you could possibly afford. That's not always the bag of compost from Lowe's or Home Depot. If that's all you can get, then that's what you get. But if you're a little more resourceful and you want to maybe venture out a little bit, there's a lot of great composts out there that are incredible, and they're full of biology that didn't get bagged, that didn't get sterilized, put on a boat, put in a truck to put in your store to get into your garden. Through that process, we lose a lot of living organisms in there just naturally. So it might have started off as a very high biology bag, but by the time you get it to your garden, we lost a little bit. But so there was a couple of what I call just fathers of soil science. One of them was he was a Russian geologist, Dukachev, Vasily Dukachev, and he thought of soil as a living system, and he saw soil as a like a biological science. Albrecht Thayer differentiated peat, which is formed under very limited oxygen, from humus, which was formed when there's adequate oxygen. But what he said was that each one had very different qualities to the soil. Thayer has been called the father of sustainable agriculture. A.B. Frank said that fungi, and he was the guy who first coined the word mycorrhiza. He was the one who first started studying without the microscope, without all these fancy tools we have today, that these mycorrhiza create this mutualistic relationship with host plants and especially trees. And I think a lot of that gets, kind of lost when we plant trees in our landscapes now. It's like, hey, where do I get the biggest burlap and ball, and how do I, cut the biggest hole and throw a few handfuls of Scots or Miracle Grow in there and let her go. But these trees really need this mycorrhiza, and most plants have a specific type of mycorrhiza that they utilize. And these guys were talking about this eons ago, right? And Thayer also hypothesized that that fungus extracted nutrients from soil minerals and translocated those nutrients to its host. I think we've talked about Dr. White on this show several times, but that's something that he has now proven. This was, in Thayer's time, this was a philosophy. He didn't have the tools that Dr. White has to really, understand rhizophagy, which we call it now, but he understood that hundreds of years ago that these organisms in the soil create this mutualistic relationship, and that he said that fungus extracted nutrients from the soil, and move those nutrients and minerals to its host, and then the host in turn nourishes the fungus. And whenever I tell this to anybody, whether it's a young crowd or a grower, I always say, look, it's like the plants are putting out a help wanted sign. And they say, hey, help wanted, we need nitrogen, phosphorus, calcium, whatever it might be. And they're probably very specific on this sign. It says, hey, we need nitrogen. And so all of these nitrogen fixing bacteria come running and say, hey, I'll do the job in turn for some nutrients, some sugars, right? And so it's this little economy that's happening below our feet. And the host, is giving back just as your employer pays you for clocking in this morning at 8 a.m. So he also identified these differences between endo and ecto mycorrhiza. And like I said, there's a lot of species that are very specific on the type of mycorrhiza that they utilize. So again, when sometimes we have these products that paint a broad picture of mycorrhiza, well, what does that mean, right? There's a ton of different mycorrhiza out there. Just because you have one form of it in your product doesn't necessarily mean it's going to benefit my plant. But anyway, this period of soil science was considered the golden age of soil science. And along with the invention and the perfection of the microscope, that was really when we begin to start to understand, what soil should be. We really started to look at soil as life. Unfortunately, as we started to perfect the microscope, and for all the good the microscope has done, right? The microscope has provided, the medical community and researchers an an unbelievable advantage in defending against disease and things. But the microscope has brought us to this point of division in soil science. And really what happened is once the microscope was perfected, it really split the soil community into two parts. One was these agrochemists. And they said basically, if we can't grow it in this agar medium, then we don't care. And then you had this other group, these agrogeologists, who understood soil as Brad and I do, as life. We look at soil as a functioning system, like a whole system that's working in harmony. However, we're probably in the minority. Most soil scientists and soil analysis is conducted for one purpose, and that is to promote or sell a product. And I don't say that to we're not digging on anybody here. We both did it. Brad was a user of these chemicals or these products for eons. I sold these products for some of the largest retailers in the United States. And it's just we always looked at a soil analysis to tell us as like a roadmap to say, okay, we need X amount of pounds of calcium nitrate. We need X amount of pounds of nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, whatever it is. So I think it's always important to understand that there was a time way before the words organic or natural or regenerative or holistic, all these things that we have today was being done hundreds of years ago by guys who really truly started studying soil long before we had the fancy tools to do so. They understood what we are all trying to promote today. So as you tune in with us here the next several weeks, our guests will probably talk about how, this divided philosophies change agriculture production, and how we're reversing course and getting back to the right way, if you will, that is at the very least looking at soil as a living thing, not just as a media to grow crops.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think I don't want to beat that too much, a dead horse there, but I do think that for the large part, we kind of missed in big ag that little piece there, that piece where we got divided and we only looked at, and I still do it. I know you look at a ton of soil analyses, and I'm hoping you can share some of that with us today, Brad. But I know we did it for a long time. We got this report from the university or the local soil lab, and we didn't have to think, right? It told us exactly the exact amount of pounds of every product, and all we had to do was source it from the cheapest provider, put it out, and away we went.
Yeah. And the biggest focus was just on pH, and I don't get as excited about that as I used to be, as long as I'm within a range. But yeah, like what you talked about, the things that we were doing, and we've talked about that. I've talked about this before, but I'm in my 60s, and as I started growing citrus, working as a 10-year-old hoeing orange trees, we were kind of growing that way. I just didn't realize, we were cover cropping with just whatever grew naturally in the groves, and we weren't. My family wasn't herbiciding yet. We didn't have low volume irrigation. We weren't intensely farming. It was just kind of trees far apart and very little cultivation, very minimal spraying, just what we had to do. And things did very well. And then I actually was part of the system for 40 years, to where I essentially went out of business at the end of 40 years because it was too intense. And, now my focus has always been on citrus because I was a citrus grower for so many years. And when I got into this soil health and plant nutrition thing about 8 years ago, and really felt that it could help agriculture, especially citrus, and then ran into a grower that was like me, had gone out of business and was just planting multi-species cover crops. He was doing some soil studying to build soil till he pushed out his trees, and the trees revived and came back to life simply by recycling the nutrients and feeding biology in the soil. So from that point on, it was game on. That's when, well, I don't know if we want to go into my research and what I did on my little 5-acre sandbox for 5 years.
Yeah, I think it's worth it. So here's the thing, and I think, Brad and I talk about this a lot, but there has to be some result, and for a lot of people who are either looking at making a change on the farm, maybe starting to sprinkle in some biologicals, or starting to look at their soil just from a different point of view than the university or your local lab in Georgia or South Dakota or something like that. Because whenever I talk to growers, or whenever I talk to anybody in agriculture, everybody always tells us the same thing. And Brad and I talked about this just before we jumped on, is we're always looking at the above ground result of our input. And we calculate everything on that value, right? So everything is, if it's $10 in for an input per acre, how many bushels do I get out? And I think it's worth sharing with everybody that you and I both see this, that one, it takes time to do what we're doing. It takes time to repair 250 years of degradation. But I think there's a whole lot that you and I see below ground through the analyses that we use that don't result in a bushel per acre. So I would love for you, if you have some of that data with you. I think that's definitely worth sharing as we get in here the next few weeks, talking about the science of soil nutrition.
Yeah, and we do still focus on, you're not going to grow, especially in Florida sand, without fertility. And
Yeah.
so we look at chemistry tests. We're looking at balances. There's all the balances between nutrients, but it is that living fraction of the soil that feeds that nutrient to your crop, and their food is carbon. Whether you add it or you grow it, they have to have a food source. And so that's really what we've gotten away from, is just the straight chemistry model. And that's kind of what happened in citrus, just having bare ground monoculture crop with nothing but an orange tree in it. And 50, 60, 70 years of that has taken its toll on that industry. So once I realized that biology was what really drove the system and could help the citrus industry, then I dove into that research on my own and just started. I bought a 5-acre piece of land, put some citrus trees on it, some peaches, all different kinds of fruit crops, planting multi-species cover crops. And then I'm measuring organic matters. I'm taking a microscope. I'm looking at biology as things progress and soil gets healthier and stronger. I was even putting vegetable seed in with my cover crop seed that would go out. So there would be mustard greens, turnip greens. I'd put in some strawberry plants, squash, cucumbers. And as the years progressed, I could measure the quality. The basic way to measure was just taking a Brix reading. I would even use Brix reading on leaves to kind of give me a guideline of the health of my plants. But to measure the crop, the fruit, each year the quality of that crop would go up. The pest and disease pressure would get less. One of our guests that's coming on is a world-renowned entomologist, and he would talk me off the ledge continually. I'd send him out an email. I said, I got this leaf miner that's just, I can't get a growth. I said, I've got to spray something. I got to get something from a jug. And he'd email me back and he said, just hang on. It will adjust. And eventually things would adjust. But that was my mentality as a grove caretaker for 30 years. That was my job, to get up every morning, figured out what I was going to go kill that day to help this grower grow a crop. And so but over time, pest and disease, citrus was the tough one. There was a few pests that just never really went away, but just from the diversity of the insects, the diversity of the plants that were in that system, which was, as we'll talk about, is the diversity of the microbiology in the soil from all the different root exudates coming from all the different plants. But I would Brix a strawberry, and they weren't big bushy plants. They weren't hyped up on nitrogen. They probably were a little lacking, but the strawberries wouldn't be as big and bursting. But I could most all of the berries that would just grow out there, and I wasn't fertilizing them individually. They were just getting what everything else was getting, and I was doing some biological stuff and different things, but I would get a Brix reading of a 15 or a 16 on a strawberry, and it tastes like nothing you'd ever tasted. And I was surrounded by a conventional strawberry farm that the sprayers were running continually, and Brix readings would be a 7 or an 8. And you would think the pests would all be flying over to me as they were running them, but that never happened. They didn't want to eat my plants. I guess the health of them was so. That pinnacle can be reached, over time, to where you can get a plant healthy enough where it has is very little, not very affected by pests and disease, but just the greens that would grow as cover crops. I'd Brix test a mustard green as a Brix of 10, which is way high up on the scale for a brassica, for a green. And I'd go to the store and I'd buy some greens, or even the local guy selling them down the street that didn't know any better than just to pound them with 666. And I'd get Brix readings of a 2 or 3. And all the neighbors, the little old widow ladies, would come and harvest. I'd give them greens, and they'd come back the next day and said, I've been cooking and eating greens for 70 years. I've never had a mustard green batch taste like that. So
Brad, wait, let me back you up. For everybody who's listening, so Brix, like, is Brix just in your mind, or your expertise, is Brix a measurement of just sugars, or what are you looking at when you talk about greens and things like that? I think everybody's heard about Brix testing and fruits and things like that. Yeah. But when you're testing greens, what is Brix? If you could just real quick give us a quick explanation of Brix and why you measure it.
Yeah, and I should have touched on that first. And in the citrus world, which is where I'm from, that's how we got paid for juice oranges. It was the Brix related to a Brix acid ratio, which gave you a pound solid of material that, which we always called it sugar because that's what you got paid for. But
Yeah.
it's when you take a Brix of anything but of a fruit, it's predominantly glucose or sugar, but it's all total dissolved solids. So it's your nutrients, it's all these compounds, anything, the vitamin B's, the flavonoids, that is all solid. That's not water. So it's measuring all those things. So it is the nutrient content of that fruit, and that's where your flavor comes from. It's the minerals give it the flavor. All these things that the plant is getting them from the soil. All the stuff that we need to keep us healthy is in the plant, but the plant, it comes from the soil in the beginning, and that's what is kind of hard to get your head around. That soil is essentially the stomach of the plant.
Yeah.
And but Brix is the higher the Brix, yes, the higher the sugar, but it's organic. I mean, it's all the compounds and the nutrients.
Yeah, so the taste is infinitely better. No
Right.
matter if you're eating mustard, if you're eating citrus or strawberries or peaches, the flavor value goes up exponentially as we increase our Brix.
Yes.
And when you say, you had a 15 to 16 brick strawberry, is that kind of the standard? I mean, I know a lot of guys right now are probably in that, geez, 5, 6, 7 range. Um, that's pretty much where we're at, right? As far as
Yeah.
bricks on strawberries.
Yeah, no, that's pretty much it. And again, it's what we've talked about in some podcasts in the past
Mhm.
is farmers are getting paid by the box pound and bushel. And we can pump these things full of a lot of nitrogen and just focus on growing volume, and that takes away from quality. But it's not necessarily the case. But I have seen strawberry plants with a 10 or a 12 or a 13 that are big and bushy and full of nice big berries. But you have to focus on that. You have to dial in with testing, and your soil has to be doing good. You have to be using good things. So it's not a compromise necessarily. In the beginning, it is to try to go soil health, and you're going to see some lack of production. But when you stay with it and you do the right things, that'll come back around. But like you and I have talked about in the past, until the grower is paid on quality, then it's not as big a deal. So if the grower's getting double the price because his strawberries are double the nutritional value, then he only has to grow half as much to make the same amount of money. But
Incredible.
you can exceed that. You can exceed that.
Yeah. So how are you quantifying these changes? I mean, the bricks is like the lagging indicator, right? Like the bricks is
Right.
the ultimate end. What are you doing on the front end? How are you measuring that? And how many times have you seen that effective change? And how long does that take? Are you seeing it kind of immediately in some cases? Do you see it over time? How do you convey that to the grower?
Yeah, and it does take time to build healthy soil. Takes time, and you can do a lot of really cool things from a jug. You and I do that
Mhm.
uh, to push it like it could in a natural system where you had a really healthy soil that you'd built up over years. Uh, my clients, we still use a lot of things that we add, but the healthier your soil is, you don't have to rely on tools to get to that point. But you can take enough tools with some of the technology that's out today and almost grow you'll never grow a perfect plant, but you can grow a really healthy plant just with biostimulants and
Mhm.
bugs and all these different things. But a grower can't afford to do it that way. It's like my garden I just put in for the first time at my new place, and I'm near the water, and the soil is just like beach sand. It was dredged out of the canal. And so I went out and bought a truckload of compost that went on my front yard and half of it went on 2,000 square feet, the equivalent of 200 tons per acre. Well, a grower can't afford to put 200 tons per acre of compost at $30 per ton. He'd never recoup that, but you can almost instantaneously make that a healthy soil by doing that, and then understanding fertility as we do, and putting good inputs and good fertility and good foliar sprays. And I intend to have a really healthy garden. And I started with garbage, but it's not, a grower can't invest $5, $6, $7,000 an acre right out of, he's got to show a profit at the end of the season, and that can't happen in that situation. So, but for the gardeners out there, yeah, good compost and a lot of it, and you can do it pretty quick.
Yeah, and for us here in Florida on sand, I probably anywhere, you can't over apply compost. You know, if you're fortifying your garden, even your landscape, you know, there's a lot of guys here. A good friend of mine up at Council Oxford here in Florida, he does a lot of spreading over lawns this time of year with, you know, that command type product, and it's incredible. I mean, the return on investment to your landscape for the homeowner, again, we're talking about 6,000, 10,000 square feet versus a grower who's got 1,200 acres. So for the homeowner, maybe it costs you a couple $100 on a weekend, have a guy come out and spread some mulch or some compost. But for the grower to implement that on even 200 acres is a huge cost, knowing that their costs are continually driven down. Um, there's competition all over the world for just about every crop that we grow. So there's a lot of pressure. So growers are always looking at the end of the year. They kind of know where they're going to get paid per box or per pound for or bushel for a crop. So everything comes off of the top, right? So they're thinking, okay, corn growers like, okay, I'm getting $4.15 a bushel of corn. So everything that he does comes off of that. Well, if I got 100 acres, that's $415 an acre. You know, what do I, how do I calculate my inputs based on that number? And so same thing for every citrus grower or strawberry grower, as to Brad's point, it's so difficult to just go out there and put 200 tons of a manure or 200 tons of a compost, which would really, like you said, drive organic matter, excuse me, through the roof for these growers and really probably do a lot. But again, we are constrained by the cost of production, and for the average consumer to fully understand that $200 for your yard, we can get up to $200,000 on the farm.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's why I like cover crops. Cover crops is inexpensive. You know, you're talking about for a seeding, you're talking about $50 an acre. Oh, but that takes time. That's years. I mean, you got these no-till farmers that are roller crimping and planting, you know, corn and beans into thatch, but it takes them years for that to take hold. That's not instantaneous carbon. I like it because it's inexpensive. It's root exudates feeding biology. Then as the top of the plant decomposes, that's carbon that's going into the system. I work with some big vegetable growers down south that are on flood irrigation. That is not a possibility. They're doing plastic culture with flood irrigation. So you can do a cover crop in the fallow season, which is great. We do that, a multi-species that goes in the soil. But from that point on, you have to use some, you can put out a compost and pull it into the bed. But from that point on, you've got to get some labile carbon in that system under that plastic. And that's where you and I do things like put organic acids and things under there at planting, and then foliar nutrition, really good foliar nutrition. I used to think of as a crutch because it's not building soil, but I was wrong. It really is building soil. And I won't go on too long. And we've talked about this before, but your crop, if it's weak, like these citrus trees are pumping almost no exudates out to feed biology. They are they're just giving it whatever the grower gives it, and there's biology can't get fed by the plant. Only your crop knows exactly what it needs from the soil. And so when it uses its own exudates, if it's truly healthy, it can give up to 40% of its energy, its exudates, with all these signaling molecules to wake up the biology that it needs, whether it's added or whether it's natural, to summon up the nutrition exactly what it needs. But it's, we've talked about it before, it's like the chicken or the egg. You got to, which one comes first. So it's hard to have a really healthy plant if you don't have healthy soil. So that's where we use tools to do things, and those tools you can use less and less of as you do good things to build soil.
Yeah. And, excuse me, our conversation today is all about, dirt to dinner. And I think before we jump off here, Brett, I think it's just worth talking about one, you've already pointed it out. For us as consumers, and we're all consumers, even a grower, even farmers are consumers, right? So when we say that, everyone's lumped into this term of consumers. But for those of us who are excuse me, outside of the ag complex, let's say, we might think, why is it so hard to produce a crop that has the highest potential nutrition? Like has the highest nutritional value, has all the things you're talking about, all the micronutrients, the nitrogen and all the proteins. And when we talk about beef production, why can't we just grow or produce a cow that has the highest nutrition, a lower body fat? Why can't we do that? And I think the real challenge is, as you said earlier, I think every grower wants to do more or do better. But he and she are no different than your business that you go to every day. They have to watch their cost. And there's a point where it just doesn't make economic sense for them to make the most nutritious crop because they're not going to get paid for it. And I know that sounds very capitalistic, like, oh, if they're not going to get paid, they won't do it. No. If they're not going to get paid, they're not going to be in business.
Yeah,
And that's
we don't
just
farm for fun. We love it, but we don't do it for fun. We do it to make a living.
right. And every grower I talked to in the last 10 years has told me the same thing. Most of their kids aren't coming back. And most of them are telling their kids to go do something else because
I did.
it's as you did. As it's not just for fun. This is a very difficult, we're not during, if you look at farming, this isn't like, we're walking through the fields, hoeing beans with a hand rake, or, we're not on the back of an ox tilling the ground anymore. Everything's mechanized. So when everyone says, farming's really hard, it's not really the act of it. The hard part is you have to be everything on the farm. You're everything, right? You're the accountant, you're the tax guy, you're the marketer, you're the farmer, you're the scientist. And if you're into animal husbandry, you're the vet 95% of the time because you can't afford to have a vet every day, right? So these things become a very critical question, which is, should I do it? Yes, I should do it. Can I afford to do it? Maybe, maybe not. And if I do extend myself a little bit, as we all do in our daily budgets, if I do extend myself a little bit and go over budget, how much longer am I going to be able to stay in business if I keep doing that? Because the return, the ROI for the grower isn't what you see at the grocery store. Everybody in that supply chain, and again, this is another conversation. We need to find some people here on the supply chain side, but from you, the citrus grower, Brad, to here in Florida, Publix or Kroger or wherever you live, from you, the farmer, to your grocery store, there's a whole bunch of people getting paid in between there. There's a broker, there's a trucker, There's someone who has to inspect it, a USDA person or some other third party. There's a whole bunch of people who got to get paid. So whatever you see at the grocery store isn't necessarily turning back to the grower. And I think as we talk about from dirt to table, the science of nutrition in our soils really is an art, as Brad was starting to describe, as much as it is a science.
Certainly.
Because we have to kind of balance all of these things. And guys like Brad and I, who are consultants, and even Logan, for the most part, he talks about it all the time, having to understand how to treat these bees, which, by the way, if we didn't have these bees, we wouldn't have any crops. You can make the argument if we didn't have flowers, we wouldn't have any food. But for us to navigate all of the technology, all of the things that we know how to build soil, how to build nutrition, for us to navigate all that and convey that to a grower and sift through the noise for them is really a challenge. So I think we're all really challenged, Brad. And I love what you said about the foliar feeding as it drives soil health. And because I think that a lot of people don't really dig far enough into why can't we grow the most nutritious crop, because it seems really easy for all of us who are walking through the grocery store shelves today.
Yeah. No, I agree. Yeah, there's some micronutrients that our soils, ag soils have issues, and there's just some nutrients that just almost have to go in through the leaf just to get the plant to function properly. While you're building biology, building carbon to take those micronutrients that are bound up, or the right biology isn't there to release them, to get them into the plant, so then it can in turn put out the right root exudate that it needs to do to summon up the biology to feed it your manganese or zinc or iron or boron or whatever that plant knows its needs. So
Yeah.
100%.
So let me ask you this. In your opinion, obviously this is all our opinion, but where are we at? So as far as, making the change from the old way of producing crops, especially where we are here in Florida, vegetables and fruits and perishable items, not just grain crops. Where are we moving in the right direction? Do you see a lot of positives starting to happen? And do you see that eventually the consumer, as we always say, the soccer mom and dad who are just trying to feed their kids healthy food, do you see them ultimately benefiting here in the short term? Or are we still decades away?
I think that we're still decades away. As far as, there's always going to be commodity farming. Every farm in the nation is not going to be growing regeneratively or focusing on soil health. It takes a long time to get there, to truly get there. Oh, you touched on a few minutes ago about the how long will it take? Most of these farms have been farmed this way for generations. The good farmland was picked. My great grandfather picked the best grove land on the highest spot on the south side of a lake or whatever, because and then they got farmed for the last 50, 60, 70 years intensively. And there's a quote from the dean of the University of Florida 100 years ago that I'm not looking at it, but it essentially said it is much easier to maintain the organic matter in your soil than to deplete it and try to bring it back. And if you turn your soil into a sandbank, disastrous things will happen. This was what was said by the dean of the University of Florida. He was actually the president 100 years ago. And so I went down.
And here we are.
Here we are. So yes, it's going to take time to truly build, but just in the 8 years that I've been in this, the understanding that, especially with plants, with cover crops, with this diversity of plant crops in soil, can build carbon levels and biology faster than we ever thought. They should say it would take 100 years to build from this to this. And when we have, I almost dropped a name, but when we have our rancher on in this series, he will elaborate on that. He's built from 0.5% to 5% over not too many terrible. It wasn't 100 years. He's only 69 years old. So
Yeah.
in 20 years. So it can
When you
happen
hear him
faster than you
talk,
think.
though, you would think that he's been doing this for 200 years. I mean, the guy is and look, hey folks, we're not gatekeeping here. You're going to probably we've got again, we Brad and I are so incredibly lucky. We have a whole team, right? We have a whole team. We have a marketing team, we have a social media team, which is really like two people. So they do really amazing work for us. But you know, hey, we're going to promote this, so please stay tuned on our social media channels, Facebook, Instagram. I believe we still have a TikTok page, certainly LinkedIn and all those things. And if you're not already subscribed to our website at thegreengenefoundation.org, if you click on the podcast button there, there's a subscribe. You subscribe to our newsletter. We're not going to spam you, but you will get the notification when a new episode is out, which is just about every other Friday. We are launching an episode. So every 2 weeks, you get an episode. So tomorrow, this episode will launch. I believe it's Thursday still. So this episode will launch on Friday. And then 2 weeks after that is our first guest. And you touched on it. He was an entomologist for the government, correct?
Yeah.
And then 2 weeks after that, we have our incredible speaker and rancher, who has, I mean, this guy, he's talked all over the world, right?
Oh yeah, no, he's. I run into Acres USA as he was a keynote speaker. You don't want to miss either one of them. They're both going to be really, really good. These are some rock stars of the industry.
You
that are
really
gonna-
don't. You really
Really
don't. So
knowledgeable, really, really smart people.
yeah, and they're just great speakers. I mean, I've
Yeah.
been listening the last couple of days now. I'm like, geez, these guys are really great. One of TED Talk, he did a TED Talk. So look, hey, look, as we go forward here, you know, I think Brad just hit the nail on the head. I think we're still a little bit of a ways out from increasing the nutritional value of everything you eat on your plate. But it's not to say that nothing's happening, right? Because there is so much happening. There are so many people involved in this transformation as we go forward, especially in the United States and around the globe. I think there's certain countries that are maybe a little bit ahead of us, but certainly here in the United States, I can't tell you. I have got a bunch of friends at the Commodity Classic this week. They're talking about regenerative. They're talking about adding biology. They're talking about growers who are in the 400 bushel club in the I states up in the Midwest. Everybody's looking at how do we increase soil health, because everybody now knows, if they didn't before, now we actually have systems, products, and educated people like Brad to help you do this. So now everyone's kind of looking at it. So as Brad says, I think we're still a little bit of ways before it shows up in our grocery store shelves. Just know that there are millions of acres being grown today that are at least implementing some sort of soil health. And there are hundreds of thousands of growers, as you'll meet here in the next couple of weeks, from all walks of life in all parts of agriculture, whether it's animal production or crop production. Everybody's looking at how do we do better. So I'm really optimistic. I think we're on a really great track here in the United States. I think there's some things happening in DC.
Yeah.
Believe it or not, there are some things happening in DC, as much as we all
Yeah.
might pain to turn on the news today. But
Yeah.
there are really great things happening. I'm really
think
happy
it'll
to be
be.
part of that.
I think it'll be three things. You know, I always say it. I think it'll be consumer driven, whether it's a tool that the consumer has, but I think it'll be consumer driven. I think there is going to be some help for where some of this money used to go where it shouldn't have went, to come help the farmers in the right way. And then in my mind, a lot of it is just necessity to the growers. We have, and I keep my finger on this pretty tight, but we see new pest and disease issues coming just in the last 10 years that are just compounding. And a lot of that is just due to this too much chemistry model only. And I think it's going to come out of necessity as we start doing some of these good things. I always see pest and disease issues start to decline. So I think those three together can make this begin to happen very quickly.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. So we're on the right track. So hey, thanks everybody for joining us again here on the Modern Farming Podcast. Again, if you haven't joined us already on our website, please check it out. The greengenefoundation.org. That's the greengenefoundation.org. Check us out, subscribe to our podcast page, and don't miss the next several episodes, as this is part one of a 3-part series, Dirt to Dinner, really looking at the science, nutrition of soil health and the nutrition of your food. So Brad, awesome to be with you again. Can't wait to see you in a couple of weeks with our first guest, and have a great rest of your week. Be well.
Take care.